Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We're here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is brought to you by the Future of Work newsletter. Every week, you'll get articles, resources, and tools that will help you, your team, and your organization be more successful in the ever-changing remote and hybrid work environment. Learn more and sign up at remarkablepodcast.com/FOW. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Workplaces fit for humans. How does that land with you? How does yours fit? How fit is yours? And what can you do as a leader to change your workplace if you don't like the answer that you immediately thought of? That's what we're here today to talk about. Welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And of course, we're here live on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook, and we're glad that you're here. Wherever you're here with us live, I hope that you will imagine that you're joining us for a cup of coffee. So if you've got questions, if you've got comments and ideas, share them. They'll make for a better conversation, eventually for a better podcast. And feel free to say hello and tell us where you're from. We'd love to know that as well. So if you are watching this, or most likely listening to this later on the podcast, you could have gotten this information sooner, and you can learn more about joining our LinkedIn or Facebook groups so that you get insight and the ability to log into and see these much sooner when we do them live. You can do that by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Our episode today is brought to you by Remarkable Masterclasses. Each month we release a new skill in an advanced masterclass format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or to get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with all of that in the bag, let's bring in our guests. And yes, if you weren't paying attention to the title, or if you didn't know, yes, there are two guests today, and let me introduce these two smiling faces, and then we'll dive in. Our guests today are David Brendel and Ryan Stelzer. David is an MD and PhD, more on that in a second. He's the co-founder with Ryan of Strategy of Mind, an executive coaching, consulting, and leadership development firm rooted in philosophy and psychology. He is a board-certified psychiatrist with an MD from the Harvard Medical School and a PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago. His writings have appeared in the Harvard Business Review and the Huffington Post, and he is also the author of a book called Healing Psychiatry: Bridging the Science-Humanism Divide. Also with us today is Ryan Stelzer. He is the co-founder of Strategy of Mind. He served in the Obama White House as a presidential management fellow, where his team was responsible for improving and sustaining high levels of performance across federal agencies. His writing has appeared in the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, and LinkedIn Pulse, and together they have written the new book. That's why we're here. Think, Talk, Create, Building Workplaces Fit for Humans. Gentlemen, welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Glad that you're here.
Thank you for having us, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
And here we've got Frank is in Johannesburg, and Mahmoud is in Cairo. Let's see. We got people from all over, so no pressure, guys.
That's great.
We're looking forward to it.
All right, so let me start with this question. So how is it that the two of you came to work together? You got sort of very, at least from what we know so far, very different kinds of backgrounds. What brings the two of you to come to work together?
Well, I was working in management consulting, and a friend of mine, this is true, cut out and snail mailed an article in The Economist called Philosopher Kings. And the article said that business leaders would benefit from studying great writers. And referenced in the article was this guy named David Brendel, who was working coincidentally in Boston. I was in Boston. And so we sent a note, got together for coffee, and an hour and a half later, we had a company sketched out on paper. It was very serendipitous and very much not planned, but we hit it off right away, and we've been together ever since. He stuck with me.
You're stuck together. We'll leave it at that, right? So in an hour and a half, you sketched out a company. How did you come, or what led you to write the book? We'll let David in on this. So what led you guys, once you had a company of strangers, what led you to write a book? And how long transpired between that first serendipitous meeting and where we are now?
Well, as you mentioned, Kevin, we came from very different backgrounds, medicine, psychiatry, executive coaching on my side, management consulting, working in the White House on Ryan's side. So it seems on the surface, unlikely bedfellows. But I think as we spoke, what we realized, what we held in common, some things that seem superficial. We both were at University of Chicago. We both studied philosophy. We both entered different careers. But I think what we found in common from the many different workplaces we were in, medical, hospitals, politics, banks, management consulting, was that the workplace has become incredibly stressful, at times toxic. Burnout keeps going up, and people are so in the weeds with their work and so stressed and burning out that there's and individuals and companies do have trouble stepping back and figuring out what can we do to fix this, and not only enhance people's quality of life and the meaning of their work, but also the performance of their companies. So that was an area that we converged on from very different paths, and it suggested to us there must be something underlying this dynamic that really cuts across workplaces, and maybe a solution that comes out of things like dialogue rooted in ancient philosophy, like Socrates most famously, and also rooted in modern evidence-based cognitive psychology and neuroscience. So we started thinking about these topics, how to apply it with our clients, and then that was where the book came from. We wanted to not just provide a critique, but also a potential solution, and that is what we outline in Think, Talk, Create.
Yeah. So the subtitle of the book is sort of where I started off before I brought you guys in, which is this idea that the workplace is unfit for humans. That's sort of the underlying question when the subtitle of the book is Building Workplaces Fit for Humans. So I want you guys to talk about this. But before I do that, recognize that we've got people with us live from at least 4 continents based on who has said hello. And knowing that we're probably going to have people listening to us later on the podcast from multiple continents. I guess my opening question before we even dive into that specifically is your sense that this is a global phenomenon, or are we talking about something that, in the US, the emperor has no clothes or whatever? What is your take on the global nature of the problem first?
Well, we include examples in the book from David. I mean, we can list the countries probably together, certainly the US and North America, but we have examples from Japan, from throughout Europe, from Southeast Asia and East. I mean, we're covering the globe with the stories here, because unfortunately, this issue of toxic workplaces and dehumanized work environments is a global. I don't want to use the word pandemic given what we're going through right now, but it is a global issue that's affecting workplaces. Take the theme of karoshi in Japan, where people are working themselves to death. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon, and unfortunately, it's somewhat contagious. And it is currently, it's emerging across modern work environments because it's a mindset that led to this sort of behavior where it's dehumanizing workplaces. But when we can get more into the mindset after, but absolutely, this is a global issue. This is not something that's limited to the United States by any stretch.
Yeah.
So I'll let you in a second, David. So we could say, all right, there are problems with our workplaces across the globe, but you've used some words here that are pretty strong and yet still pretty general: dehumanizing, etc. So toxic. So what do you actually mean? And David, excuse me, I'll let you take the lead here. Can you be a little more specific about what you mean besides just saying sort of dehumanizing, demoralizing, and toxic? Can you be a little bit more specific?
Yeah, well, Kevin, I think that provides a great segue for what I was going to say, both on the global, outside of the U.S. Level, and also getting specific. So I'll give you a very, very quick example. We include out of France, we talk about a telecom company, multi-billion-dollar company that needed to downsize, and instead of doing it in a way that kind of preserved people's dignity and mental health, they did it in a way where they purposely put people into jobs they couldn't do, hoping they would just quit. And in the course of doing so, caused, and this was determined by a court in France, so this isn't just speculation, this went to trial, and a court determined that the company's practices resulted directly in multiple suicides, damaging the reputation of the company and also financial payouts around that. We do have other examples of suicide, so sometimes it's literal death, and that's one of the extreme examples. And we do bring up other examples, either of individuals or of groups, where it was the same kind of very toxic result. So there are certainly specific cultural manifestations across the globe here, but the mindset that underlies it is that people can be digitized, we can be turned into numbers and algorithms and dehumanized in the course of that. And there may be short-term financial gains that come with that. But the long term is burnout, decreased financial performance, not for all companies, but for many. And in the worst case scenarios, multiple suicides. We're talking dozens of suicides.
Okay, I'm guessing that most people haven't yet gotten a copy of this book because it's relatively new. We are talking with the authors of Think, Talk, Create, Building Workplaces Fit for Humans. And so, I've read the book, so nothing that you just said surprised me, but some people say, I didn't expect to get on here and hear about suicides. Things are bad in my company, but they're not that bad, perhaps. But I don't want us to linger there. I think regardless of how we feel about it for ourselves, we get the point. So I'd rather have us take the flip side and say, so, okay, we're talking about organizational culture here. So what is it that you're advocating for? So we've sort of stated the worst case, sort of stated the thesis. What are you advocating for? Where do you think we should be trying to head?
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, building human workplaces and building human-oriented workplaces, we think, and we try to argue in the book, can actually be profitable, if not more profitable than current business practice. So by creating an environment where human beings are able to thrive, and they're not just sort of members of physical plant, so we call it human resources in the book, because they're treated oftentimes like the chair, the stapler, the desk, just another cog in the machine. But in fact, if we extract sort of the notion that human beings are people, and we try to create these positive human workspaces, it's a mind-blowing idea, I know.
Newsflash.
You can actually be more profitable, because by creating these high-performing, psychologically safe environments where people want to thrive, your company's going to grow. So humanity can actually be really helpful to your bottom line.
David, because of your sort of professional expertise, when Ryan says the phrase psychological safety, that phrase gets thrown around a lot these days, for sure, with good reason, I suppose. But with your background and your professional experience, what would you say about psychological safety and what we ought to be doing or could be doing as leaders at all levels to create more of it?
Well, I think I would say a couple of things. One is that the term is used in a general sense to talk about people's quality of life, decreasing stress, burnout, depression, anxiety. There are plenty of studies published in plenty of highly regarded evidence-based medical journals showing that the workplace directly is resulting in both physical and mental illness. Some of this is laid out well in the book Deaths of Despair. So the psychological impact of the psychologically unsafe environment is clear with regard to many different psychiatric disorders. But the term psychological safety, as we describe in the book, also has a much more rigorous, evidence-driven, well-defined definition, which is worth looking at also because there's a wonderful growing literature on the importance of psychological safety for high performance in the workplace. And the most concise definition from that more focused standpoint is a workplace where individuals across the organization, up, down, and across, are free and encouraged to speak openly, to express their opinions, to bring up safety concerns, to be able to brainstorm ideas without fear of negative judgment, reprisal, or being fired. So there's the general piece about mental health and with psychological safety, and then there is the more laser-focused definition. We really consider both of them in the book, and also, as I think you want to head toward, Kevin, talk about some of the specific techniques that we can use and that all of us can use individually across the organization to enhance psychological safety.
Yeah, let's talk about that point, because we're obviously here. This is a podcast called the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Many people who might be watching live are thinking we're thinking about this from a leadership perspective, and absolutely there's a leadership component of this. But even as I asked the earlier question, I'm thinking I need to come back and loop back, because there's a role for all of us to play in creating a place with greater psychological safety than just when we have the title of or position of leader. So you want to say, either one of you want to say more about that for all of us? Ryan, you told me before we started that this is an everyman's book. And so maybe you want to take a swing at that additional idea here. This isn't just, even though I know many of you here are leaders, and I'm glad that you are, there's more here than just that. Ryan?
Yeah, we were having a conversation with a friend of ours, and she was talking about, we tell the story in the book, and she was talking about how the company that she was working with was toxic and negative and abrasive. And this was a person who had an executive level position within the organization. So she was railing against the company being toxic and negative and abrasive and a bad place to work and not psychologically safe, and on and on and on. And at one point, I think David stopped and said, "You are the company." And so it's this moment of reflection for her, that it was, wait a minute, you're talking about the company being these things, when in fact, not only are you a representative of the company, you're an executive in the company. You are the company. So to say that the company is toxic, we're talking about people here who work for the company. The company itself isn't toxic. The company doesn't exist without the people who work there. And so a key point that we try to make in the book is this idea of agency, and it's rooted in the ideas of William James and pragmatism. But the idea of agency is that you have the ability to create change within your organization, no matter your level within the organization. And not only do you have the ability, but you also have the responsibility to do so as well. And so whether you are an entry-level employee who just joined the organization as a junior associate, or you're the CEO sitting in the corner office, you have the ability to create psychologically safe, high-performing environments by building this sort of sense of humanity within the workplace. And that goes, like I said, for everybody, up, down, and across the organization.
100%. I always say to leaders when they start saying that to me, I said, what you're seeing is a reflection of you. Maybe you ought to go look in the mirror. You use the word reflection, Ryan. And so I think we have to take that seriously, but also to your point, Ryan, not just if we happen to be an executive. It's like obvious to say, well, that executive person, but it's really all of us, right? The role that we play in making all that happen. We talked about psychological safety. We've talked about several things so far, but what other factors or descriptors do you want to highlight from the book around the culture that we're trying to create, or that you're advocating for?
Well, building on this idea of the everyman, and that we all have capacity and responsibility to enhance the safety and humanity of the workplace, and also to draw on the title of your podcast, Kevin. Some of the most remarkable leaders that we talk about in the book are groups like custodians, insurance adjusters who are they're not in the executive suite at the insurance company. They are on the ground in the day-to-day. So we lay out what these people are doing to that permeates the organization, and it is generally things like slowing down, getting in touch with the humanity of the situation, and then crafting solutions through this think, talk, create process that creates sort of a bottom-up positive influence. So like because we did a group program which we describe extensively with a property management company that runs assisted living facilities around the Northeast, and there was a lot of burnout in that company, a lot of low employee engagement. So we had a group of them, and there were about 8 different groups: the executives and the accountants and the legal group and the compliance group. And they were organized at tables around the room. And we went around the room and said, what keeps you up at night? Let's hear what the difficulties are. And we got a lot of the standard things. The workload is too high. The communication is poor. Everything's siloed. The other groups aren't communicating or working hard enough. And it was the custodians that really created the game-changing moment, because they stood up and said, what we've been talking about at our table is the loss that we experience when one of the elderly people in the assisted living facility that we've gotten to know over the years and really like and care about, when they die, when we no longer get called for something that maybe they didn't even need to be called about, a leaky faucet. What the person really wanted was a conversation. And it did lead to a remarkable change in the session we did, and we followed up with this company and heard that it changed the whole nature of the organization. They got much more into, instead of telling each other what to do, asking, what do you do? What's getting in the way? Why are we not able to get the reports we're asking for on time? The conversation became more human and the performance increased. And it was the custodians who were the remarkable leaders here. And we have a whole bunch of stories like that in the book that we hope are both inspiring, but also are action-oriented. You can do this. You can train your people and create an environment where these kind of conversations really do happen.
I want to get to that idea of active inquiry in just a second, but what I want to say to all of you who are watching us live is that just because this is sort of like a microcosm of an organization, right? Like, I'm kind of the leader and I'm running all this and you're all just watching, but this belongs to you too. So if you've got questions for Ryan or David, just ask them, put them in the comments or wherever you're at. I'll see them and we'll be happy to ask those questions or follow up with questions that you might have. Happy to have you do that. But let's talk about active inquiry, which, David, kind of where you were headed. It's the phrase that you use a lot in the book: think, talk, create. This idea of we've got to be asking each other more questions. So talk about what you all mean by that and give us some good examples.
Yeah, active inquiry is basically it's the theme of our book, in the sense it's the answer. It's the thing that you can do and you can take to work tomorrow, today, if you, and for the folks who are watching around the world, we're so grateful that you're here, that you can bring into your office and you can try to build more human work environments by practicing active inquiry. So think, talk, create is the practicum for that. So it's the how do you, okay, so what do I do? And it's really this simple, repeatable 3-step process of pausing, taking a moment of reflection and thinking through sort of thoughtfully what is it that we're trying to address here? Talking, and when we talk, we're using open-ended questions. This is the key piece of active inquiry. Open-ended questions are questions that do not end in yes or no answers, so they elicit more elaborate responses. So questions that start with words like what or how are good examples of open-ended questions, whereas a closed-ended question might start with are you going to do this today? That's a closed-ended question. The person would say yes or no, as opposed to what are some things that we might think about to make sure that this is a successful exercise? That's an open-ended question. And then create. I mean, this is the process where you're collaborating and innovating. And we're trying to build solutions for organizations. So the reason why we end with create is because this is a process of innovation. And we say that human environments are better for a company's bottom line because they're collaborating and creating new ideas. They're building new ideas. They're innovating the future. So when there's a problem that arises, there's a think, talk, create culture. You're more apt to solve it, and you're more likely to see those numbers that you were chasing before, and in an inhumane way.
One of the things that I love about the book and about the process is that, first of all, there's a couple things. One is I love that it starts with pause and think, which we all need to do more of. But you have both used that word pause multiple times, and if we're going to be effective as the leader with positional power in creating active inquiry, we also have to pause after we ask, because if we immediately move to our answers or we get too worried about the silence, then and we fill it, then we're never going to get anybody else's thoughts, because they're just going to say, oh, the way we play this game is they'll ask a rhetorical question, then they'll start answering, and we can just sit here. That is not what you guys are talking about at all. Comments about that? Anything else you want to add, David, perhaps about active inquiry?
Well, we sometimes in the book call it AI. But to put it side by side with artificial intelligence, which is so driven by science and tech, part of why we like to call it AI at times is to remind people this is not a touchy-feely process. This is not something that can be done casually in the course of the day, like having a water cooler conversation about the score of the game last night. This is a rigorous process of asking open-ended questions. It is very hard to do it, especially when we're really busy and stressed out and a million things need to get done. We are much more, our amygdala, the fear center in the brain is firing away. We got the fight or flight going. It's hard to stop and think. So it's much easier to tell people what to do, bark orders, ask for things now, and just create a more hostile environment. So the active inquiry, it's really rigorous, and asking the open-ended questions, they really do need to be thought about. We encourage people: is this an open-ended question or not? If it's not, stay silent a bit, or keep the conversation in a different place, and then come forth with the question. There's more and more psychological, social science, and brain research that shows that conversations don't go well. There was one study that showed that 98% of conversations are rated by one or the other of the conversation partners as ending at the wrong time. Either somebody cuts it off and ends too quickly, or somebody keeps talking for too long. It's an enormous percentage, and systematically it can lead to failure. So that would be the one other thing I would say about AI. It is a science. There's an evidence base to it, and it can be learned.
So what can we do other than read the book? And we are talking with the authors of the new book, Think, Talk, Create, which you've heard us say. I'll put it here so you can see it. Other than reading the book, what are there specific things we could take away right now to help us be better at doing those 3 steps? Where would you suggest that we start?
We sometimes suggest start at home. Whether it's with a partner, a spouse, a teenager, or some other family or friend, where there is already a very basic sense of trust and safety in place, but there may be some difference of opinion or conflict. We do talk about a couple of stories, one in particular about how one of our clients used active inquiry with a teenage son, and then saw how great it was, both for their relationship, and then how it also helped enhance his career. So we look at any opportunity you can find where there may be some difficulty or tension or friction, and try to sit down and say, hey, can we have a conversation for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, where we just do this a little bit differently. Instead of my saying my opinion, and you're saying yours, here's the structured way to do it. Let's just test it out and see where it goes. We can go back to, fighting and disagreeing later. And people often get such remarkable results in a brief conversation with somebody they already trust, that the confidence then builds to transport it into the workplace. So that's one very low-hanging fruit way every one of us can think of somebody in our life where we're having some difficulty. Hopefully not a really horrible one, but some kind of difficulty. We all have that. That would be a place to start.
And the beautiful thing is, not only are you suggesting if we use this process and start with those that we have higher levels of trust with, which makes total sense. The reality is, as we implement this idea with others, it will begin to be a way to create the psychological safety, the levels of trust that we really would hope to have elsewhere as well, which is the big win all the way around. What's the question, guys, that I didn't ask that you wish I would have, or is there something else that you think we should talk about before we start to wrap up?
That's a great open-ended question, Kevin.
Yeah,
do my best.
Perfect.
No, the questions were all fantastic. I think they were very much on point for the book, and they covered all the themes very well. There really was no question that we wish you had asked. I think the key takeaway for us is that we want folks to walk away and hopefully with a copy of the book and know that they're capable of making a difference, and that there really is. It sounds as though it's canned, or that we're being insincere when we say that, but you actually do have the ability to create a difference in your environment, no matter your role. And this book hopefully will just be a nudge in that direction to help you start to do that. And like David said, practice. It's the funny thing about active inquiry is that we talk about it as this sort of innate human skill, and it's a skill we're all born with, and we have the ability to do it. I was talking with a friend of mine when she first read the book, and she had a great comment, and she called and she said, "I love how your book is so obvious." And I actually took that as a compliment. It was great because she said it's of course we should be doing this, and we all have this ability, but it takes skill, and you have to practice this. And so I see there's a question coming in, so I'll turn it back over to you, Kevin. But this is something that you are capable of leading change, but it does require some practice.
Common sense is not common knowledge, everybody. Let's just be clear, or common practice. So the fact that it's obvious should just let us gets our resistors down, so we can say yes. And now what do we do? Right. So a question came in, and I want to see if you guys want to take this. The question comes in and says, how do you manage stress in a very complicated corporate environment? So maybe David, you want to take a swing at this? We haven't talked about that directly, and yet much of where we started this whole conversation related to that question. So do you want to comment on that a bit before we start to close out?
Well, there's certainly some of the basic self-care things, like make sure you're sleeping well, eating well, exercising, maybe engaging in mindfulness or other kinds of stress relieving activities. So but a lot of people say that. I think what we would add here is see if this think, talk, create process might help, and especially active inquiry. Who are the key people that you're working with? Whether it's a direct report, a peer, even your boss, to sit down and say, can we take 10 or 15 minutes and have a conversation? And then try out the active inquiry, where let's say your boss has hit you with 8 different projects and you can't get even 2 of them done.
Oh,
right? You sit down and, bring some honesty and authenticity and say, I really want to get this right here, but I'm not sure I fully understand the priorities. Can we talk this through? I'm feeling like I am not going to be able to get everything done at the A+ quality level that I want to. And what needs to be an A+ today and this week, and what can wait? So that's an open-ended question. That doesn't allow the boss to say, just do this or do that. I mean, unless you're dealing with an unbelievably hostile workplace, in which case you may need to have that conversation with somebody else.
Well, in that case, you need to have the exit conversation. Like, I think it's time
you may, what kind of severance package would you be willing to offer is also an open-ended question. But
that's true.
But we in most situations we actually believe that starting with some degree, not naive hope, but some degree of hope, that you're dealing with other people who are also suffering and would like to genuinely try to make this better. That's the right starting point. If you're running up against a totally toxic or sociopathic environment, there are other steps, obviously, that need to be taken.
Right. Hey, I want to shift gears as we start to wrap up. I always know that when we get into a great conversation like this, it's going to go longer. And when there's two guests, it's going to go longer. But I've got a couple things I'd like to ask everyone, and I think it's valuable, not only in the context of this conversation that we've had today, but just for all of us who are getting the chance to learn from experts like the two of you a little bit, to know a little bit more about you, to give us more context. So the question is this: Ryan, what do you do for fun?
David knows this answer. He can answer it for me. I am an enthusiastic golfer. I'm not on tour, but I love to play golf. It's my hobby, and it's something that I try to do as much as I can. Haven't been able to play as much this year because of obviously the book and working on it, but I'm a big golf enthusiast. And
David, for you, go ahead.
I just want to point out David's son, Elias, is an exceptional golfer. He plays high school golf now. He's a freshman, and he's been incredibly talented. He just started playing a couple of years ago, and his level is just, it surpassed mine. And so I just want to give a shout out to Elias because he is remarkable on the course.
David, what do you do for fun?
Well, sometimes what I do to both have fun and torture myself at the same time is play golf with Ryan and with my son, who are both so much better than me, which I love and admire. But boy, golf is a tough game, especially when you take it up in your 5th or 6th decade of life. I also, and this comes through in one of the chapters of the book where we tell the story of the New York Islanders hockey team. I'm a passionate New York sports fan, even though I live in Boston, and I have I have 2 sons who are both athletes, and one of them a future broadcaster and journalist in sports. So that's a time where we just bond, father to son, and whether it's at the game or at home, it's a special time for us.
Perfect. So the other question I ask everybody that comes on here is, what are you reading? So David, you want to go first? What are you reading these days?
Well, over the last few years, both writing this book and reading widely in the literature, whether it was Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference or sort of some of Adam Grant's work, I got to the point where I was just reading too much in the business psychology and business management. So I've switched over to a couple novels now. I'm on the 3rd of 4 novels by Richard Ford, the Frank Bascom novels, which are just an amazing description of the course of a man's life, from being a sports writer to being a real estate agent, divorced, with wonderful relationships with his children, but complicated stuff. And it's been really, really engaging. So I'm in the middle of the 3rd one, called The Lay of the Land. The
Lay of the Land. And
yeah. Ryan,
what about you?
It's also novels, believe it or not. I know we're writing nonfiction books, but we still keep our toe in the novel pool. Every Halloween I try to read a scary book. I love Halloween. I love scary books, and sort of I've done all the classics. My favorite is Turn of the Screw by Henry James. But I had never read, with all of the scary books that I have read, I have never read a Stephen King book. And so this year I read a Stephen King book for the first time. And what a remarkable writer. He's such a good writer. And I know that I say that it sounds silly because obviously he is, but I had never read a Stephen King book. So I read Salem's Lot this year and really enjoyed it. And so I continue to read novels and nonfiction books, as David said, but we always try to keep our feet in the novel space.
So now the question that you've been wanting me to ask from the beginning, like, where can people learn more about your work, more about this book? Where do you want to point people?
I'd say the Strategy of Mind website is probably the way to go. It describes our backgrounds. It describes the book, provides relevant links to some of our other websites, but strategyofmind.com would be the portal.
All right. Now, Ryan?
And the book is available wherever books are sold. It's going on sale actually internationally. I think at the moment it's ongoing. It launched in the US about a month ago. But yeah, the ebook's available, audiobooks available on audible.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you name it. If you can buy a book there are books available through the outlet. So please pick up a copy if you're so inclined.
And if you can't find it, you can go to strategyofmind.com to find it some other way. So now the question that I have for all of you who are watching or listening is this: another open-ended question. Now what? What are you going to do with this? Because what's the point if all you did was find this entertaining? Because you probably could have found higher quality, strictly entertainment than the three of us. But when you add in the application, then you've made this last 39 or 40 minutes worth your time. But until you ask that question, answer that question, and take action, none of the rest of it will matter. Maybe it's for you to think more about psychological safety in your organization. Maybe it's for you to think more about the culture in your organization and what you, wherever you sit in the organization, what you could do to start to change that for the better. Maybe it's you making the choice to say, who could I have an active inquiry type of conversation with today? Whatever that would be, that is the best possible thing that you could do as a result of this. And so, gentlemen, thank you both for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. We enjoyed it.
And everybody, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everyone.